Hey, it's me again. Looks like you're well on your journey with Vanguard overdress, having picked up the new start decks and having a lot of fun, I see. But of course, with the release of DBT01 Genesis of the 5 Greats, it must be pretty tempting to start upgrading that deck as well. In today's video, I'll be telling you the main and most important cards that you will need to pick up from Genesis of the 5 Greats in order to upgrade those start decks. First things first, let's take a look at the Nirvana Dragon Empire start deck. The first thing you'll want to pick up from the first booster set is the new Perfect Guards, because these Perfect Guards are only rare, so they're quite easy to get. They're generally pretty easy to pull from packs and boxes, and you can always check with your local community if they have any extras, because these also got distributed as promos. The reason why is because these Perfect Guards have a clause that says you only have to discard for their cost if your hand has 2 or more cards. Therefore, when your hand is only 1 or less cards when you use a Perfect Guard, you don't have to discard for it. Therefore, it is a superior Perfect Guard, and with it being only a rare, it's quite easy to get, unlike Perfect Guards in booster sets in the past, which were always double rare. The next thing you'll want to pick up is more critical triggers. This deck in general likes to play 7 or 8 criticals, and therefore picking up more will obviously be a good plus to your deck as well. Now we touch the first double rare card, which is Verena Arcs. In my opinion, this is arguably the most important Verena form because it allows you to draw extra cards, thus giving you a lot more sustain throughout the entire game, as being able to go into multiple Verena Arcses basically just keeps giving you card draw. It's basically a pot of greed with a body, and that of course is a very good thing. This is a double rare and shouldn't be too hard to get either compared to triple rares. Up next, I would recommend Veloci Hazard. This card I think is generally the last grade 1 slot in the deck as well, simply because it is a 10k booster, which makes it easier to hit for magic numbers with your attacking units. If you want to learn more about magic numbers, I do have a video on it which you can check out in the top right corner or in the description below. Next, we'll want to swap out the Cray Elemental overtrigger from the start deck for the Dragon Empire one. So Drag Veda is definitely an upgrade here because it restands your Vanguard when you do check it on the drive check, which can be very nice at finishing games, obviously, even if the overtrigger isn't enough, because then you'll be able to reuse Nirvana's skill to Calmas 1 and power up itself, plus your overdress units one more time. Finally, the last card that you really do need to pick up from this booster set to upgrade your deck is Verena Valiente, the cover card of the set, which is also a triple rare, and it is a little bit more pricey. Currently, pre-orders are going for about $12 to $14, and so you do eventually need 4 copies of this, so even if you pull 1 or 2, you can slowly start to put them into your deck and then build towards that final build. But this will definitely be a really good inclusion into the deck, which I think will stay for quite a while because of that immense hit pressure it has, plus the fact that its power gain from having original dresses actually stays during the opponent's turn as well. So I think this card is honestly a very good pickup, although it is a triple rare. Next, we'll take a look at upgrading the Bruce Dark States deck. Just like last time, first thing you'll want to pick up is the Perfect Guards. So once again, these do have an advantage over the ones in the start deck in that when you have only 1 or 0 cards in hand when you use it, you don't have to discard for the cost, which is very, very nice. Again, we also need more critical triggers because this deck does like extra criticals for more added aggression and just more pressure during your final rush turns. And then we're looking at one of the best rares in this entire set, which is Protobulb Dragon. This card is absolutely amazing, being able to essentially put one of your rears into the soul and then fetch out anything from your soul into your hand. This allows you to basically recur your persona rides every turn. If you soul charge a Perfect Guard, you can add it to hand. If you soul charge an overtrigger, you add it to hand, just whatever you want. And if you attack with it and then restand it with Violence Bruce, you can use that skill twice in a turn while opening up your field so that in matchups like Prison, you don't actually suffer from your stuff getting imprisoned. Next card you'll want to pick up is the double rare Marjorie. Marjorie's a really good card as well, similar like Protobulb, and she's quite similar to an old Dark Irregulars card, Number of Terror, where she allows you to, while in Final Rush, put a rear guard into your soul to draw 1, soul charge 1, and give plus 10k to herself for the whole turn. Therefore, she's a really strong attacker on Final Rush. She also soul charges for you, basically 2 cards, and gives you card draws. So in general, just for resource management, she's a fantastic card. Also quite cheap, so definitely need 4 copies of her as well. Up next, Gungunram is also very important. Grade 1. The Persona Ride icon on it is a misprint in the English version, so don't mind that. It does not have Persona Ride. His skill is quite simple, just to soul charge 1 when placed, but the ability to soul blast 3 to draw a card is really important because it allows you to actually sustain yourself and survive past more aggressive matchups until you get to the final rush turn. So I think 4 copies of Gungunram is also very important and is also a double rare. Diabolos Boys Eden is also a very important important pickup as well. This is the triple rare for the deck, but generally much cheaper compared to Verena Valiente. This card is just really good because it's a 15k attacker in Final Rush. It also gains an extra critical when restood by Violence Bruce, and on top of that, when his attack hits, you can almost want to pop an opponent's rearguard. This doesn't have to hit the Vanguard either, so you can, for example, bully your opponent's rearguards by attacking into them with Eden, and then if you hit, you can almost want to pop another one, which is also really good. So I think 4 copies of Eden is also something that you want to work with. Generally, most cards that I recommend here are at 4 copies outside of things like the Overtrigger. Speaking of which, the Overtrigger is probably the last thing you'll want to pick up for Violence Bruce, because the Dark States Overtrigger, while it is quite strong if you check it early, some people honestly just play the one from the start deck because it actually distributes more power and overall has more of a threat, whereas the Dark States one sometimes just feels like an extra crit when checked and doesn't do nearly as much compared to some of the other ones. Next, let's take a look at Bastion. So this is Keter Sanctuary. First things first, you will need Perfect Guards as usual. I think as if you've been listening to this entire video, Perfect Guards and critical triggers are the sort of obvious pickup for all of these decks, so just keep that in mind and pick up 4 copies of each. Next, I honestly think that Cocabiel is probably the card that you want to pick up the most after that. She's only a common, but she gives a defensive option as a grade 3 to the Bastion deck, which I think is very, very necessary, and so should definitely be picked up. And she's, I mean, just a common, so it's very easy to get her. Next, I would say Dark Strain is also a very important card. It is a grade 3 that turns all your grade 3s into boosters, which is very, very important in having strong power lines. So I think that this is also a very easy pickup because it's only a rare. But in upgrading Bastion, it's very important to pick up the triple rare, which is unfortunately at around like 12 to 16 bucks in pre-order, which is Alden. Alden is a fantastic card that you do need 4 times because this guy says when you call him, you can almost 2 and Soul Blast 1 and call a card from your hand. And if the card you called from your hand is a grade 3, you draw 2 cards. That alone is fantastic. It's basically a Pot of Greed with a body, which, as I've said about Verena Arcs, is just fantastic. And on top of that, he gains 5k every time he attacks for the whole turn, meaning that if you restand him with Bastion, he will actually gain plus 10k for that turn from having used that effect twice. And so he's just a really, really amazing card, by far one of the best grade 3s in the deck, and so just as a rearguard, like, he's very, very necessary, which sadly makes Bastion one of the more expensive decks. After that though, you do want to pick up the Overtrigger for Keter Sanctuary. It is one of the most explosive ones, and Amar Tanoa is just a very, very good one. Giving drive check to your rearguards when checked on drive is super powerful, especially when all of them are basically grade 3s, so you're going to be twin driving with both of your rearguards, which is really, really strong and can just win you the game right there. Fasado is also a very important card. Not only does it give you a option of Countercharge and Soul Charge, which are 2 resources that this deck cares about a lot, it also cannot be chosen by opponent's card effects. So, you know, things like the Verena's Retire, or things like the Prison deck, or Eugene basically can't touch him unless there is removal that removes an entire column or the entire field, which Bastion actually does have. There are a few sort of optional cards in here as well, so you can pick up these ones depending on how you want to build this deck. So for example, Prescription Angel, as well as the Downswing of Sword of Judgment, are 2 cards that are played as 4-ofs in the Control Bastion build, which I will talk about in the future. But if you want to build a deck in that style, then you will need those cards. Apart from that, the Big Snake Witch Solaria is a pretty common card that some people try out as well, basically allowing you to Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 to draw a card when you discard her for either your ride deck or for the restand skill from Bastion, so you just get more card draw. Also, Lepisto is pretty common, basically allowing you to have a more high roll turn, where if you check a trigger and a grade 3, you get to restand 2 cards, and that is definitely quite powerful as well, and giving you 5 attacks. Or just the Blitz Order Hopeful Testode, which is a 15k shield if you have 3 or more units on the field. So those are generally all the main cards you want to be picking up for Bastion, as well as some option cards, because this deck is very easy to like try out different builds, because all it needs is just a bunch of grade 3s, and so since most of the cards in the set for Keter are grade 3s, you are pretty flexible in how you build this deck, so that's why I named a bit more cards than usual. Up next, let's take a look at Stoicheia with Magnolia. So once again, you know, for Magnolia, the same does apply. Perfect Guards as well as more critical triggers are definitely something you want to pick up, and are generally easy to get and pretty easy to find, and of course check with your local scene to see if they have any spares they can just give you as well. I think the best card for this deck though that is only a common is Ghost Chase. This is a Blitz Order, so use it when your opponent's attacking to basically bounce one of your rearguards back to your hand and then give a unit plus 5k power for that battle. So this is really relevant because because, you know, Magnolia, for example, either some people play revival cards in them, some people just play the ride line that calls from the top deck. Sometimes you'll call a overtrigger or a perfect guard from the top of your deck and you want to bounce it. Sometimes you just want to bounce really good cards that have an on-play effect. So Ghost Chase, in my opinion, is a must in Magnolia, or in every Stoicheia deck for that matter, because it's such an amazing card, so you should definitely pick this up at like 3 or 4 copies. Next, we have the Adamantis. So Adamantis might seem like a very simple card. It's also common. When you place it on rearguard circle, you can give a rearguard plus 5k. Doesn't seem like that much, right? But honestly, for Stoicheia as a whole, you know, not just Magnolia, this is a really important card to actually, you know, convert some of your columns to hit for really good numbers, to ask for more shield from your opponent, and again, you can bounce this with Ghost Chase and reuse its effect next turn, so that's also really, really good. Spiritual Body Condensation is another order that is played in Magnolia, basically giving you the option to Soul Blast 1 to revive cards is very nice. Some people have gone even as far as to splash the entire Zorga ride line in Magnolia just because they run 4 Spiritual Body Condensation. So, you know, being able to revive anything from your drop zone just like that is honestly a very good effect, and it's just Soul Blast 1, which, while might seem a bit steep for Magnolia, is definitely manageable. But of course, in terms of raw Stoicheia cards, there are 2 that are very, very important. First one, in my opinion, is Elenia. Elenia is a really good card because she essentially allows you to counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 to revive a grade 2 or less card from your drop zone, and this gives you essentially the early rush plays. So, you know, you can mill something, or you can just like top deck call something that maybe gets retired, or you Soul Blasted away something, and then you can revive it and give it 5k, and that way you can start rushing your opponent from turn 2 onwards, which can win a lot of matchups such as Bastion. So I think this card is very important at 4 copies in the Magnolia build. And also the grade 3, of course, Gunosia is super important. This is probably your best attacker that there is. In the back row rearguard circle, when it attacks, you can counterblast 1 to give one of your other rearguards its power. So if it has 15k power just because you use Magnolia skill on it, that 15k gets added to something else. If you gave it an overtrigger, then it passes that 100 million and whatever else it has onto something else. This card is super, super important. It's generally pretty cheap. All the Stoicheia triple rares so far have been pretty affordable. So this is a really important card if you're upgrading your Stoicheia deck. And finally, the overtrigger is also really important for Stoicheia because this one is basically an omni trigger, right? It lets you to draw, give something a critical, give your front row plus 10k, and also works as a heal trigger when you have the same or more damage than your opponent. So it's overall a really, really strong overtrigger that it doesn't hurt to see it at any point of the game. Finally, we have Brandt with Tomadi's Seraph Snow deck. As usual, first things you want to pick up are the perfect guards from the booster set as well as more critical triggers. Some people explore with fronts in this deck as well, but I think you should first pick up the criticals above all else. In terms of rares, you want to be picking up Granarod Fertigars because this card is quite nice. Soul Blasting 1 to become a 15k attacker and also imprisoning one of your opponent's front row rear guards is really nice because a 15k attacker means it'll be 23 with a boost of 8, and that will ask for 15k shield. So of course that's an important thing for this deck because it does have fairly low attacks otherwise. In the same fashion, you should pick up Grapple External because that card gains 5k, you know, as long as your opponent has something imprisoned. Therefore, with an 8k boost, it'll be 23, and again, you're asking for perfect amounts of shield and generally just pushing the aggression. Chevalstad is a pretty good double rare as well, basically being able to give you main phase imprisonment, while at the same time, if you imprison 3 or more, giving you extra card draw. Of course, there is card draw in the start deck already, but more card draw doesn't hurt, especially in a deck that doesn't really use resources too much. Counterblast pretty sparingly and Soul Blast pretty sparingly as well, and so because of that, you can definitely get away with using Chevalstad. In my opinion, the overtrigger for Brandt is also very, very important. This overtrigger doubles the power and critical of all front row units until end of turn. Therefore, you know, if you check it after a critical trigger and you apply it to Vanguard and then, you know, double it, then that's going to turn into 4, you know, things like that. It's definitely a very powerful overtrigger that I do recommend picking up and replacing the one from the start deck as soon as possible. Agara Rouge, the triple rare for this deck, is also quite good. She's basically a 15k attacker as well as a 15k shield if your opponent has 2 or more cards imprisoned. So that is already very nice. We talked about the magic numbers already, but having another defensive option is really good. Sometimes you don't even have to call her and she'll already be just a 15k shield in your hand, thus letting you survive certain matchups. And when she's placed on rearguard circle, you can Soul Blast 1 to choose an opponent's front row rearguard and imprison it, thus giving you more imprison on the same card while gaining powers. So that is definitely very, very good, and so I do recommend picking it up. And finally, this is probably going to be a staple in Brandt for a very long time, and while it doesn't feel as important in the police deck compared to Orphis, this is still a really important card, which is Bauble Mine. Bauble Mine's skill is quite simple. At the end of the battle that it boosted, if your order zone has a set order, put them into your soul to countercharge 1. Countercharging is important because it lets you use counterblast more aggressively and just counterblast more per game. I think for the police deck you're okay with 3 copies, but I would still pick up a 4th one just in case you want to play Brandt in the future, because I think that as long as they keep printing set order support in Brandt, this card will be a must and a super staple, so I definitely recommend picking up at least 4 copies of this just for future proofing, and you never know when they print more counterblast effects for the police deck in the future, so I think this card is super important, but sadly this is also the most expensive double rare, because in Japan this goes for about 12 bucks, so do keep that in mind, but as it's a double rare it's also a bit easier to pull compared to the triples, so hopefully you can have some luck with your boxes and packs as well. And that just about covers it. So hopefully you have a good idea now of how to upgrade your start decks. If you need any example builds, I did do a video a little while ago where I showed my first sort of draft builds for all 10 different ride lines. So those are the 5 from the start decks as well as the 5 from the booster set, so you can check it out if you need an early build. I will be making more updated deck profiles over the coming weeks and just mostly coming days actually, as I will have my hands on all 10 decks and I'll be able to deck profile them for you guys, so you have a reference of most up-to-date builds. If you want other inspiration, you can always check out VG Top Decks on the WCC channel or Decksender's blog to check out other topping deck lists. And so I wish you luck, fellow card fighters, in your journey with overdress. Hopefully you have a good time upgrading these start decks and playing in your local scene, or playing online with Remote Fight, or participating in the Bushoid Springfest online. Whichever challenges you decide to take on, I wish you good luck and hopefully you stand victorious. On that note though, that'll be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.